Hey there, my name is Haley Shust, and I'm a learning experience designer at Salesforce. This ATD Toolbox tip is going to focus on writing meaningful alternative text, aka alt text, for your images. Before we get started, I must state that this Toolbox tip will be tool agnostic. The process of adding alt text will differ based on the type of work that you're doing. If you use authoring tools, you'll probably have to enter your alt text into a field or check a box that says this image is decorative. If you're developing, you'll have to write some basic HTML for your images. Perform a simple search to locate the alt text resources specific to the type of content you're creating. I guarantee that ATD has a few that could help. With that disclaimer out of the way, allow me to briefly explain why we have alt text in the first place. There are three main functions. First, alt text is read aloud by a screen reader, thus making an image accessible to users with visual impairments. Second, search engines rely on alt text to identify images and index them. The better your alt text, the easier it will be to find your image in your favorite search engine. Lastly, alt text is what displays if an image doesn't load or if a user blocks a site from displaying images. If there's no alt text, all they'll see is a broken image file. Ultimately, alt text is our opportunity to contextualize an image if it cannot be seen. All right, so let's move on to the meat and potatoes of this tip. First, we'll explore when alt text is needed. To make this as easy as possible, I've structured this into a series of questions. Our first question is this image decorative or informative? So let's dig into that a little bit. Decorative images are typically used to break up long sections of content and to give our users' eyes a break. Or to put it simply, they help to make our content look pretty. These type of images do not contribute any information that has not already been mentioned in the written content. An example of a decorative image could be a border or a divider. Now on to informational images. This type of image has meaning, intention, and sometimes function. Informative images provide novel information that might not be discussed in the content, or they help to emphasize a piece of the written content. Without this image, the user would lose context if it were removed. There are also instances in which an image, such as an icon, can act as a link or a button. In those cases, it's important that it can be announced by a screen reader, meaning that it must have alt text, so that the learners know what the function of that icon or image is. So here's the final ruling. Alt text is required for your informative images, but not for your decorative images. Once you've labeled your image as decorative or informative, let's move on to the next question, which is, does this image contain text or data? I ask this question because images of text or complex images such as graphs and charts can pose challenges for screen readers. A screen reader can only read alt text. It will not announce any of the text on the image or synthesize the data in the graph. So we have to be very strategic about how we're going to communicate the information from that image. I like to consider character count when I'm deciding how to proceed. Let's say I have a few images of quotes that I'd like to incorporate into my content. If that quote is short, less than about 125 characters, then I'll include the quote text when writing my alternative text. An example is shown here with a quote from Maya Angelou. I can use all of the text within that image within the alt text. Now, if my quote is longer than 125 characters, then I would suggest pulling the text from the image into your written content so that it can be picked up by that screen reader. Then, I will include an image of the speaker with some very simple alt text. An example is shown here of Gandhi. The quote itself is rather long, so I didn't include in the alt text, but I do have a picture of him with some very simple alt text, just to let the reader or learner know that there is a picture of him praying to emphasize the quote that goes alongside of it. And this same principle will apply for complex images like infographics, charts, or data tables. Make sure that the text or data is synthesized in the written content or summarized. And then use alt text to summarize the information. So what I mean by that is write a very short alt text to kind of summarize what's going on in that graph or chart, and then have the actual data included in written form within the content. This is the most accessible approach as it ensures the context is not lost if the learner cannot view that image. Now on to our last question. Is the image described or referenced in the written content, including the caption? This question exists as a check for redundancy. Sometimes I notice that the caption for the image is the same as the alt text, and we want to avoid this. Alt text should be unique. It should not repeat what's stated in the content or the caption verbatim. Okay, So I think we're ready to focus on how to write meaningful alt text. Before we go through a few examples, I'll talk through 5 basic rules. Rule number 1, be descriptive and concise. Aim for a simple phrase or sentence that's no longer than 125 characters long. If the image is complex and requires a lengthier description, write short alt text and include an image description in the written content. Rule number 2, avoid describing the image as an image. Do not begin your alt text with a lead-in like image of or picture of because it's redundant. Rule number 3, if the image includes text or has a function, describe that in the alt text. For example, if an image is an icon that links out to a new page, the alt text should communicate that. The exception is when the image contains over 125 characters, as mentioned before, such as something like an infographic. In those cases, write short alternative text to summarize the image or indicate that it is an infographic of something, and then move the text from that image into the written content so that it can be picked up by a screen reader. Rule number 4, use correct grammar and punctuation. Always capitalize the first letter and end whole sentences with a period. And rule number 5, write alt text in the same tone as the written content. There's a common misconception that alt text has to be objective, and that just isn't true. Alt text can definitely convey nuances, details, and emotion. So by all means, write it the way that it's stylized in your voice and the way that it's written in the content. Now let's go ahead and go through a few examples. Do note, I pulled these images off of Wikimedia Commons. Some of them are a little odd, but hopefully they get the point across. So example 1 shows a few Luigis and one Wario. Let's say this image exists in a blog post about a trip to Comic-Con in 2021. If I were writing this alt text, it might include something like a group of people dressed as Nintendo characters pose at the 2021 Comic-Con. I could also write several people at Comic-Con were dressed as characters from Nintendo Super Mario games. There are a lot of ways that this could be phrased, but these 2 options are both detailed and concise. Example 2, another weird one. Note that there is image on this text, but it's pretty short. Definitely less than 125 characters. So for this, I might write alt text such as a weasel with a speech bubble stating, "Some people say that weasel words are great." Now, if I could edit this down, I might remove the part that says with a speech bubble. But again, alt text is exactly what you need it to be. Try to keep it based on those 5 rules that I stated before, and this is still less than 125 characters. Example number 3 is an icon. And let's say this icon is being used on a blog post where you click this icon and then you can comment on a post. And since it has a function, I need to make sure that's described in the alt text. Let's go with comment on this post. That way, if someone using a screen reader comes across this image, they can recognize its function. Example number 4. This is a very pretty divider that I could use to separate sections of content, but it doesn't contribute anything to the content. So we would say this is a decorative image. And because of that, we'd have to mark the alt text as null. This is usually done by adding 2 apostrophes into an alt text field. However, there may be a button or a check mark where you can mark it as decorative too, depending on the authoring tool you're using. The screen reader will now skip over this image instead of announcing it, so it's not a distraction to individuals using screen readers. And here's our last example. There's no title for this graph, so let's imagine it's some survey data from a poll that asks, what's your favorite cereal out of these 5 options? We'd want to describe the results in the written content, but let's use the alt text to summarize. My alt text might say, a pie chart illustrating the results from a favorite cereal survey. That way, if a learner comes across this image using a screen reader, they know that a pie chart is there, but the actual data will be synthesized in the written content. I certainly hope these examples help, but let me be honest in stating that writing alt text is an art form. You can write it a million different ways and still wonder if it's really getting your message across. But, like most things, generating alt text gets easier with practice. I promise. That's all I've got for today. Thank you for your time.